checar si ya está en vivo. Mandy. ¿Qué pasó, vicioso? ¿Qué quieres? Y sí, está en vivo. Vamos a ver. Vamos a ver. Mi pantalla se ve. Audio está bien. Genial. Vamos a poder comprobar el audio. Claro. Bien. Buenos días. Espero estén muy bien. Espero hayan pasado un gran fin de semana. Vamos a ver Bolsa en vivo. Operaciones, compras, ventas, rendimientos, Afori, retiros, inversiones, mercados, proyecciones, todo eso. Eh, Ahorita lo que tenemos es mercados al alza, fuerte. Claro, temprano, esto comenzó temprano, o sea, desde temprano, desde las 7:30 que abrió, pues los índices se vieron al alza, todos. Arriba de Nasdaq fue el que superó el 1.5%, bastante bien, al alza. Tengo que checar, porque estoy vendiendo activos. A ver, so, nada más me toca para que lo acaricie mi gato. Este, aquí donde estoy, sí, listo. Ok, entonces lo que estoy haciendo es vender ciertos activos que ya están viéndose cansados frente al rally, se está desgastando este estado de alza. Entonces, eh, mercados bien, positivos. La guerra, las tensiones continúan entre Irak e Israel. Eso el viernes dejó volatilidad. Eh, Nada más déjenme checar esto rápido. Tengo que cambiar high low. Booking Holding $5,000, una acción. Esto fue en abril, ¿no? Sí. 4,000, $4,151. $1,500 son 30,000 pesos. Miren esta también. O sea, Booking Holdings, no lo había pensado de esa manera, pero vean esto. Booking Holdings llegó a 4,089 en la crisis de abril de Trump. Ahorita chequense, su máximo fue 5,600. Estamos hablando de $1,600. Aprox 30,000 pesos por acción. Claro, $4,000 son 80,000 pesos. Entonces, de invertir 80,000 pesos, ahorita hubieran ganado 30. Y de 160 hubieran sido 60,000 pesos. Mira qué locura. Mercado Libre, o sea, estas son de Big Cap, gran capitalización como los Seven Magnificent o los tecnológicos. Aquí están todos. Entonces vean, o sea, hay rally. 3%, aquí fue más de 2%, pero ya se cansó. 2.5%, o sea, vean Meta también. $300 de abril acá. Ok, va. Tenemos todas estas. Tesla, ¿cómo va? 330, ok, ahí va. Ah, Déjenme mandar un mensaje. Tengo que ver liquidez para seguir comprando. Miren, quiere tocar aquí, pero es que vean, o sea, ya está Tesla ahorita, al menos en la sesión, está tomando un rendimiento lateral, un comportamiento lateral. Entonces, o se cae o sube. ¿Qué estamos esperando? Que rompa esta pared de aquí para que suba más, o este piso de aquí, o incluso este. Pero bueno, ¿qué más tenemos? Reunión del G7, las naciones más poderosas. No sé en qué país sea, pero ya se reunieron. Precio del petróleo va bien. Oro en máximos históricos. Mm, y eso es todo. La verdad es que es un día movido. Hay alzas fuertes, pero cuando pasan alzas fuertes hay caídas fuertes. Cuando pasa eso, a las 2 horas de bolsa, o en mi experiencia es lo que he visto, 2, 3 horas. Es decir, se los voy a explicar con un gráfico. Tengo el Nasdaq. A ver, recently, no, used. Tengo el Nasdaq y el Nasdaq. Ok, vean esto, o sea, comienza fuerte, o sea, fuertísimo. O sea, $3 es 4%, bastante fuerte, bastante grande. Entonces todo esto empieza a subir y aquí, 11:30, o sea, a las 9:30, pues comienza a desacelerarse. Entonces ese rally dura 2, 3 horas durante el día. Es como la fuerza que tienen las acciones, los índices durante una sesión de bolsa. Vemos Ethereum también, porque ando ahí con un tema de Ethereum. ¿Dónde está Ethereum? Estaba en Tesla, pero hay que default y que me dé Tesla. Aquí está Tesla, aquí está Ethereum. $63 de ganancia. Ya bajó porque estaba en 77 hace rato. Aquí estaba, entonces ahí va. Vamos a ver. Pizza. Ujú. Wallet. Vamos a abrir esto. Sí, claro. Ya había tocado 50,000. El Ethereum, 50,000 pesos mexicanos. Pero bueno. ah, ¿Sí se ve? Ah, ya. Entonces, es lo que tenemos ahorita. Tengo que, mientras vigilo la bolsa, veamos esto.
Stocks is unlikely to be a protracted overhang. Is that how you feel as well?
That's how I feel, and that's what the market is telling us. We have the NASDAQ 100 and the comp both above Thursday's close. The S&P 6045 was the close on Thursday. We're about 4 or 5 handles below that right now. So we've made this dramatic recovery. 16 52-week highs for S&P 500 companies. You've got IBM, Microsoft, Palantir, Darden, Dash, some names that I've mentioned frequently. And yes, we continue to show the resiliency in this market. And what's interesting to me is not even the geopolitical aspect of it, is the inability with the geopolitical events to see relief in Treasury yields. We didn't get the buying in Treasury yields. Maybe the markets were pricing in some inflationary outcome from oil. I'm not sure. I don't think anyone ultimately really knows.
There are like 5 different hypotheses on why yields were doing what they were doing on Friday. And almost got a different answer for 5 different people that I interviewed on either program on Friday, either halftime or closing bell. It seems like I got a different answer.
I agree with you. And the reality is you have a 10-year sitting at 4.40, and that was supposed to be a challenge and a problem for markets. But here we are, the S&P 60-40 pushing towards a new all-time high, and I still believe that's where we're going.
Kerry, feels like when that headline crossed that Iran was signaling that it wanted to negotiate with Israel, the market got a little bit of a pickup off of that. We've pretty much held it. We're off a little bit from where we were. But do you agree with Oppenheimer today that whatever downward pressure comes to stocks because of geopolitical events or otherwise are unlikely to be a protracted overhang?
No, I don't think I agree with that. I think they're trying to broad brush say that the market is going up, regardless of what happens.
And you don't agree with that?
I think the market has certain constraints that are built in, and we've seen it this year already several times. The market gets to the 22 times forward earnings, and it seems to be pushing up against a ceiling. I know that the markets can trade to 23, 24 times, but this market seems to have trouble pushing through that, and I blame that on concern about earnings growth. And it could be earnings growth or less than expected earnings growth that's a result of tariffs or any kind of events or inflation or just the employment situation. We haven't had a bad situation with employment. It's all positive. But that's what the market begins to worry about. So I think we're still in that range that's bound by valuation to some extent rather than by what's going on from either Trump's conversations or what's happening in terms of who's bombing who.
Krinsky at BTIG is looking at a choppy summer ahead, that the S&P the S&P is into formidable resistance at 60.50 to 61.50. Pay attention to where we are now. We're at 60.36. That you have initial support at 59.70. I know we're throwing out these numbers out, but that's what the technicians sort of do for a living. Major support at 5,800. So as long as that holds, the bulls maintain the upper hand, and we can expect new highs later on in the summer. Make sense, Jim?
I think pretty soon, frankly. Look, we're 1.5% away from an all-time high, and we know what happens regardless, Kerry, of the analytical skills, which you just displayed, which I love as well. Once you get to that all-time high, FOMO hits in.
It's going to happen. It has nothing to do with numbers or forward multiples. It has to do with people looking at what's going on and saying, I want in. I think that's what's going to happen. I think it's going to happen soon. And actually, I actually think the numbers support it from this perspective. If you look at earnings estimates for next year, and I know this is a long way away, $300 a share. Carry 22 times $300 a share, 6,600. Now, the question here is, are we actually going to hit those estimates? Well, that all depends on trade deals coming through, the tax bill getting through, and I actually think those are going to happen, and that you'll get a clear runway. So, Scott, when you were talking about Krinsky and the chop, that chop to me is what happens in the summer as people shift from looking at 2025 earnings to looking at the year ahead earnings. And it's not a perfect transition. It's choppy as it happens. But if you get some trade deals, if you get the reciprocal tariffs down to a reasonable level and the budget bill in place, this market goes higher on FOMO.
So maybe it is FOMO. Joe, I thought that note today from Goldman Sachs sets the table for so many different layers of this conversation, that households' allocation to equities hits a record high. 49% of their total financial assets are in equities, the highest level on record, and slightly above the previous peak of 48% in the year 2000. That suggests to them that if you continue to get high allocations to equities, you obviously have support for where the market is, and you support the valuations that some have here questioned.
Yeah, I think what's interesting is that households really never moved to the sidelines when we had the sell-off in April. It was institutions that were moving to the sidelines. I respect your argument about 22 times being a little bit rich. Jonathan Krinsky saying the markets could chop. I don't know if that's a reason to sell, though, because I think all that means potentially is you soften somewhat over the third quarter and you pull back maybe to 5,500 and 5,700. And from there, where do we go in the fourth quarter? So I don't use that as a reason to sell.
But I would sell.
I think more it's set the expectation. Okay, maybe you are not breaking.
Están hablando de cómo es que los mercados están tocando máximos históricos, tomando en cuenta todos los datos que han pasado. Pues el mercado es irracional. Hay guerra, sube, y sube con fuerza. Más las tecnológicas, bueno, más las militares que diga. Y después las tecnológicas. Pero bueno, ahorita hay liquidez. Tengo que buscar un activo donde colocar la liquidez mientras dejo esto. Ahora que... A ver, aguanta. Listo, chequemos el audio. Bien, es que tuve una llamada inesperada. No sé qué tienen los de Banamex, pero nada más andan llame y llame para venderme un seguro y ya tengo. De todas maneras, aprovecho pararme para hacer el primer expreso. Bueno, café es expreso americano del día. Vamos a checar. Vamos a poner esto así. Vamos a ponerle agua a la máquina y vamos a ponerle play a las noticias.
Today, and you have a number, Jim, of names within the tech complex that continue to rise.
And of all stripes, frankly. So I'll start with NVIDIA, which is everybody's favorite, right? I mean, what is it, about 6% from an all-time high? Much like the market, I think it's just going to get sucked up there. And once it hits that all-time high, again, Gary, FOMO, it happens. But if you want to look, and basically, whether it's the market or the technology sector, this is a stock picker's market. So if you're somebody like me, you're looking at stocks that are value tech, but which are doing phenomenally well. You can look at a Cisco Systems. You can look at a Qualcomm. You can look at a Google, Alphabet, which we've been talking about a lot in the past few weeks as a value tech stock. But stocks that are starting to work, so you don't have to just kind of hold your nose and buy the most expensive technology stocks out there. As I said, all stripes types of technology stocks are working, and for the very good reason that that's where earnings growth is.
It's been remarkable, the breakout that we have seen in Microsoft, and I think it's AI related. And look, I'm not just saying this. I watched.
It's Apple related
I watched Thursday's show. Brad Gerstner was phenomenal in just simplistically describing the universe that we're living in here surrounding this innovation.
But record high today for Microsoft.
Record high continues to break out. Meta trading remarkably strong as well. Nvidia trading well. And yes, to your point, it's Apple throwing up your hands as a shareholder and saying, okay, what am I getting from you in the near term that's going to revive the growth and give me confidence that the AI strategy
do you have any
is ultimately
confidence in
coming?
Apple? Because
they're going to deliver. No, they're going to deliver. I disagree with that. Apple will deliver.
But when?
Apple will deliver on the AI
Is
strategy.
there any reason for me to add to it right now? I just can't come up with a convincing reason to add right now.
You have a reasonable alternative in Microsoft. You have a reasonable alternative in others. And oh, by the way, at some point, OpenAI is coming.
Well, you just said an interesting question. The stock has obviously not performed great relative to the other Mag 7s. Is there any reason for me to add to Apple now? Well, when do you want to add to it? When it's 250? That's my point. I mean, aren't you supposed to add to stocks like that when they go through what this one has?
That's an incredibly valid question. And you know that that's what I like to do. We're going to talk about a technology stock a little later where I'm doing the exact same thing. With Apple, it has been just stuck in the mud for so long, and it seems to me to be dependent on this super upgrade cycle that just isn't happening. I agree, Joe. It is going to happen. Scott, I think your question implies that you think it's going to happen, and I do think it's going to happen. I just don't think it's going to happen in the next few months.
I don't know whether it's going to happen or not, or under what time frame is it going to happen. But it's interesting to hear a value investor look at a stock here and say,
it's 26
would I really add to it here?
26 times forward. But I want to answer your question, and for the viewers more specifically, when do you add to it? Let it develop an uptrend. It just shows no sign of life. I mean, none.
I'm not sure. It's also not. People would say it's not like it's floating out there cheap, waving its hand in the air and saying, hey, look at me. I'm, under 20 times. In fact, they're like 26 to 27 times.
I think 21 is the 10-year average. So, no, it's a little bit rich in the near term. I don't know. You can't bet against it. I'm not sure you
selling it.
You can't bet against two things, the ecosystem and the ability where they continue to buy back their shares. So you can't bet against that. Buying it right here, look, you have alternatives, and there's competition. When you think about the Mag 7, I could go to other places. I could buy a Meta. I could have bought Microsoft a couple of months ago.
Well, how about Amazon? Amazon's investing nearly $13 billion in data centers in Australia. This is after AWS invested $20 billion in Pennsylvania data centers last week. They invested billions more in North Carolina, so they're going all in. Into where they think that they can get to. Everybody owns that stock.
Personally, I own that. And I think that shows my conviction because the JOTI ETF does not own it. And I said to myself, I want to, because of what you're citing, related to the cloud, I want to be there and Amazon own it personally.
So here's an interesting thought about Amazon. And it's a stock we own, and we're very overweight it. And we bought more fairly recently. But no one has thought about this angle. We all know that people want delivery and they want it quickly and it's very convenient. But there are so many cases now in cities around the United States where the stores that people were buying goods, whether it's Target or CVS or Walgreens, are either closing or shrinking their inventory because of shrinkage, because of theft, because they can't find workers for their retail locations, that Amazon becomes the only option that people had on the retail side. AWS keeps growing, of course, because of AI, but I think that the retail business that Amazon has taken is getting another lift up right now.
No, AWS, as we asked the CEO last week in the exclusive interview that we had on the network from out on the West Coast, they're really trying to take the example of their marketplace and turn AWS into the marketplace for AI. That's the trajectory that they feel like they're on.
And AWS is a meaningful, I think it's over 50%, Carrie, of their profits. Yep. So, I mean, that's really where the growth is. You made a compelling case about why people are not going to buy at CVS, fine. And there's also the tailwind developing of China becoming less of a headwind, the tariffs there becoming less of a headwind. But really, this is now a pure play not pure play, but it's almost a pure play technology stock. And I would submit to you it's not expensive, roughly 35 times forward earnings, but we always want to adjust that for the amount of R&D spend that they're doing, the amount of new businesses that they're developing. I think it's cheap, frankly.
Meta got a price target bump here, 775 from 665. That's at Oppenheimer. Stock's at $700, more or less, as we talk about it here. You still own that?
Amazing. Yes, still own it. Haven't sold any stock. It's been, a phenomenal performer. I think that the market liked what it heard from Meta on the advertising front, what they can do for clients to create their own ad program, their own design with the tools that Meta is applying for them. I mean, that was an amazing, I think, game changer for their big
Se parece a Lagarde, la dueña del Banco Europeo.
generator of revenue for them that no one had really factored into their models to the extent that they're going to.
Not everybody, by the way, has been a runaway winner in this AI race.
No.
You got sick and tired of holding Adobe.
Yes,
As
true.
Some have said they're just not in the same league with some of these other stocks that have done remarkably well relative to the performance here. Adobe's coming off its worst week since June 4th. That's after earnings. It was last week. You sold it.
Before earnings.
Why?
Right. Well, we sold it because, unfortunately, they're having trouble delivering. They're having trouble in their major business, Photoshop, where people use Adobe tools to create content that they couldn't do otherwise.
Well, now you can do otherwise.
And now
that's sort of my point.
And unfortunately, this news from Meta and it's Google, and it's going to be other places that people advertise, such as Amazon, the clients are going to be able to make their own content, and Adobe has not moved fast enough with their own tools to keep their business.
Why? So Carrie sold it to you.
She did.
Yes.
She did.
You bought more.
Yeah, I did. Now, this is a position I've been adding to over the years. I'm cautious in saying this, but I disagree with you quite strongly when you say they haven't delivered. Because, at least as the earnings go, they beat on the top line, they beat on the bottom line, they raised guidance. And you and I were speaking about this before the show.
They delivered Can we show that chart again, please?
Can I do it to myself instead of you doing it?
I'm just going to have the chart up there. So when you talk about them delivering, I want you to see what they've delivered to you, the shareholder.
I was going to do it to myself.
Can we not do the intraday, please? Let's go to, I don't know, a year, 1 year.
Down 23%.
Year to date, 1 year.
Down 23%, 1 year.
I know, and I've been adding to it, building to it over the year. Now, look, Carrie and I discussed this, and we have different investing styles. She is a growth investor. She is not going to look at a stock like this and say, yeah, I want in. She's going to say, I want out. I am much more of a value-oriented guy. Again, when I was talking about delivering, I was talking about the operational results. Absolutely. The share price has been terrible. I understand why you got out, and it seems to, for whatever reason, stink the most when it beats on earnings. All that said, earnings estimates are starting to go up. They bought back shares to the tune of 5% of share count decline over a year. So it's not just me. They believe in what they're doing. The competitive threat that is out there, they are meeting it. That's why earnings estimates are going up. Now, Scott, you and I talk about this a lot.
What does that mean? They're meeting it.
You see it in the fact that they beat on the top line, they beat on the bottom line, they raised guidance, and earnings estimates are starting to go up. So the rub against this stock has been there's competitive threats out there. Well, they are delivering on the operational results, not on the share price. They can't control the share price. The share price, though, is a matter of time. You can only outperform, and they've outperformed consistently quarter after quarter. The share price inevitably follows, and if it doesn't, they keep buying back shares, shrinking the share count. It may take a little time, but look, I've built it over the last year. I'm going to stick with it. You know this is how I invest, right? And this doesn't matter whether it's Cisco, doesn't matter whether it's Citi. I build the position and then let it run when the market finally realizes.
They are at risk in fiscal year 25, single-digit revenue growth. The last time they had single-digit revenue growth was 2014. They have to somehow revive that revenue growth. I've had concerns. You and I talked about this about 9 months ago. Yeah. We had gotten out of Adobe. We felt that there were challenges related to AI, what it would do to the product. Look, there's a massive earthquake coming in the technology sector, and it's coming from OpenAI. And I don't know ultimately when OpenAI IPOs, if there's going to be enough room for capital to be loved in all the places that it's being loved right now. I actually think it'll be detrimental to some of the Mag 7 and to some of the names we're talking about here. Capital's going away from there. Not sure which ones in the Mag 7 are going to be feeling that challenge, but they will feel the challenge.
Let's talk about some other areas of the market that need to be discussed. They're making news today. Crude is lower after spiking on Friday. Plays into some of the moves that Joe has made. You bought the iShares Israel ETF.
Yes.
That's one move. But Enbridge and Suncor, how does that play into the totality of the story?
Okay, first of all, with the Israeli ETF, I've talked over the last several months about wanting to own it. It is near an all-time high, which it made on June 9th. Israel is the second leading exporter of technology. When we are talking about this innovation surrounding artificial intelligence, advancing to generative AI, Israel is right there alongside the United States, whether it's Checkpoint or CyberArk. So on Friday, you had the significant pullback. I believe that geopolitical pullback was an opportunity. You're getting exposure to 34% technology, 30% financial sector, another one of my favorite sectors. I wanted to step in there. As it relates to energy, everyone is trying to predict the price of oil. There's very few people that I know that can do it successfully. You had one gentleman on Closing Bell who you and I both know very well, Mark Fisher.
Yeah, and even he's having a tough time.
And he's having a tough time doing it. Okay, so I'm going to defer to Mark. What I'm going to tell you is the opportunity surrounding investing is thinking about where supply will shift if it ultimately has to shift. And so far year to date, it's interesting because the Canadian E&Ps are actually outproducing all of its developed international E&Ps, whether it's Europe, whether it's the United States, whether it's Australia. So I bought two names. I bought Suncor and I bought Enbridge. Enbridge is the pipeline that is delivering the crude oil down to the United States. Suncor obviously is the EP. There's this insatiable need on the part of U.S. refiners for Canadian oil, and you have a 10% tariff on Canadian oil. Well, guess what? The Canadian oil companies are not eating the tariff. It is the U.S. refiner that actually is eating the tariff, and you're seeing the margin compression there. So if you want to manage your risk surrounding this, you could potentially buy some puts in some of the refiners, because I think an oil price in the mid-70s is challenging for the refiners. But the shift in supply, if it has to happen, Canada is the actual place where you'll be able to deliver the excess crude oil if the market needs it. And the performance so far there is year to date. And the earnings estimates in 25 in the U.S. collectively, energy companies have an earnings estimate in which they contract nearly 12%. The earnings estimate on Canadian oil companies, they only contract 20 basis points. So I think it's a great opportunity to think about, okay, I'm getting exposure to two names in Canada that have outperformance relative to its geographic energy peers, and also could be a source of excess supply.
Okay. We have retail sales tomorrow. Something to note, especially ahead of the Fed decision. You sold Casey's General.
I did. Listen, I have to give a hat tip to Ralph Coutant in our office. He's the analyst who brought this to me. The stock has been beyond a home run. And this is just one of those cases. I said it's a stock picker's market. You have to be willing to sell high if you're going to buy low. If you're going to buy some Adobe, you got to fund it somewhere. But it's just been a heroic stock. Now trades at a nice multiple. It probably goes higher. I'm not saying this is a terrible stock. Not saying that at all. I just needed funds for Adobe.
Discretionary, speaking of, has really felt like it's reversed whatever momentum that it's had. It's down 6% year to date, the worst performing sector. You do have casinos bouncing today. MGM had a good guide. BetMGM did. Winds up, airlines up, Delta, cruise lines up. You have a comment on those?
Yeah, these stocks are bouncing around day by day by day. I mean, whether it's Delta, I think it's up 4%. Wasn't it down 4% on Friday? And on the obvious news, right? When you got missiles flying over the Middle East, what happens is you start canceling flights that are money makers from the U.S. to Tel Aviv and elsewhere. So, look, it's going to be volatile, but when you look at these stocks, much like many of the other stocks we're talking about, there is good operational performance. And to the extent that the stocks get cheap, companies buy back shares, whether it's Wynn, whether it's Delta. So as long as the cash flows are positive, and they are, these are stocks you can own.
You want to take note, too, Joe, of Goldman today and some of these other bank stocks that are up? Care if you have any thoughts here, too. I mean, the IPOs that have recently hit market have been pretty successful, to say the least. 88 have priced year to date. That's almost 40% higher than last year. 9 have doubled year to date among those CoreWeave and Circle. Chime surged, as you know, and certainly some of the other names did as well. This seems to be good for the banks.
Yeah. So we had an interesting conversation about this topic a few months ago, where I think I said that what you needed for the investment banking business to do well is for there to be a rush in which they all work. That it wasn't about, oh yeah, we're having a moderate amount and they're doing okay. That wasn't going to be it. You had to have a bunch that worked and worked really well. It may be that we're getting that. And this is just all about, market excitement about whether it's, crypto stocks or AI related. There are these categories that seem to ignite public interest, institutional interest, and that's going to be fantastic for the banks if it can continue.
Capital market activity is very strong, in particular in public markets. We've seen that there's been this little paradigm shift over the last 3 months where there's interest in the public markets over the private markets, and that works through the benefits of the JP Morgans, Morgan Stanleys, and Goldman Sachs, and the names that we've all been discussing, still maintaining an overweight exposure to the financial sector.
We're back after this. We have our calls of the day coming up. A big upgrade for one of Jim's tech names. It is nearing a 52-week high. We're back on the half after this.
Ok, fue interesante todo lo que estaban hablando porque decían que cómo es posible que toda la tecnología esté al alza, pero pues Apple, ¿qué onda, no? ¿Qué onda con esas acciones? O sea, ¿qué está pasando con Apple? Ah, interesante. Te ganaste un like. Genial, hermoso. Repost, solo lo voy a la repost para guardarlo. Estaban hablando de pues la tecnología, de que pues estamos en un gran rally en bolsa. Esperen porque no me veo. Espérense. Listo, ahora sí ya me veo. Entonces estaban hablando de que no, pues es que hay un gran rally en bolsa. Entonces todos están subiendo, hay grandes rendimientos, está excelente todo, todo va de maravilla, todo bien, fine, very good. Eh, pero ¿qué está pasando con Apple? O sea, ¿qué están haciendo para crecer o para no crecer? Entonces ese es el tema que traen. Ah, tengo que cambiar todo lo de changos. Pero eso yo ya lo tenía. A ver, vamos a abrir, vamos a intentarlo. Desde aquí. Professional, ya te encontré, aquí estás. Listo. Entonces estaban hablando de eso. Ahorita, noticia nueva, TechL es el mejor activo del día porque ha estado subiendo, pero se ha mantenido. Si yo volteo a ver todos los demás índices, chéquense, ya se desaceleró aquí, para el Nasdaq, para el S&P 500 ya se desaceleró, para el TNA se desaceleró y, o sea, quiere volver a subir bien. Mm, a ver, no lo sé, Rick. TNA durante un ratote estuvo muy barato, muy, muy barato, y se los voy a decir por qué. Nos vamos a días. Mientras todos los demás índices estaban volando hasta por acá, menos el Russell 2000, este estuvo aquí. Entonces, digamos, compro el Nasdaq, compro el S&P 500, aquí está, el Nasdaq. Nosotros ya vamos como por aquí, va. Siempre conviene el Nasdaq, pero el precio en el que he estado, o sea, 18.36 sería el doble de inversión. Entonces, durante todo este periodo, para lo que ha valido, ay, güey, ya lo moví, para lo que ha valido, o sea, ha estado más barato el TNA. Claro, con las tasas de interés y que son de empresas de pequeña capitalización, pues no esperamos que fluctúe mucho, ¿verdad? Pero, pues ya cerré las ventanas, ¿qué más quieren? 1, 2, listo. 32, listo. Entonces, se ha mantenido un poco más barato TNA. Esperen.
right? But I think where we are with Cisco is where we were with Oracle 3 years ago. If you remember back then, it was still the database company. They were just building out the Oracle Cloud infrastructure. But once they did that, they got the multiple to go from the mid-teens to now the low 20s. I think the same thing's going to happen here with Cisco. I think it's already happening. Roughly 16 times forward earnings, 3% dividend yields, buy back shares like crazy. I mean, they've shrunk share count 20% over the last 8 years or so. And it is on the back of AI tailwinds. It's also on the back of security. You know, we always talk, thank you, Joe. We always talk about Palo Alto Networks, Fortinet, CrowdStrike. I get it, but there's also a really vibrant security business here, enhanced by the acquisition of Splunk. And on the last earnings call, Cisco was very clear that what they're seeing from their big customers, whether it's hyperscalers, whether it's enterprises, they want it all in one. They want the hardware, the software, and the security. Cisco's delivering it.
All right, yes, they are. Year to date up 11%. Insulet. Initiated by 365 is the target at Truist, Joe.
Somewhat have to ignore the valuation here. It's in the mid-50s, a little bit rich. Stock's up 16% year to date. It delivers you the 20% revenue growth, but they have a degree of revolutionary type of medical device here with the Omnipod 5. That's the insulin patch. We're talking about dealing with diabetes here, not having to have that shot anymore. So new CEO recently just stepped in, Ashley McAvoy. Company is in the sweet spot. We've owned it for some time now.
Care Abbott initiated market performed today at Leerink. 143 is the target.
Well, Abbott's one of these names that's defensive. It's not quite in the crosshairs of pharmaceutical companies that are getting bashed on all sides. Abbott's in the testing business, in the diagnostic business, and that business has been strong and steady. They come through with the numbers, and it's exactly the kind of healthcare name that can outperform.
Insight upgraded to a buy at Stifel. Positive results from a rare blood disease trial. You own that stock too.
We do, but I could tell you that the momentum is broken down here significantly. You might know this name well. Yeah. It's biopharma oncology. Really, the last 5 years, it's been a struggle. A little bit of a high valuation. We stepped into the name on a rebound in the stock. We saw some momentum that was developing. Even with this upgrade today, I don't see a green light ahead.
What about Boston Scientific? Outperformed 118 at Leerink.
Medical device is one of the favorite names. Again, valuation is a little bit rich here. A lot of these healthcare names, you're seeing valuations that are somewhat stretched, but we're staying with this name. So far, year to date, it's had strong performance. The earnings growth is there, and as long as that's visible, I think the position will be maintained.
All right. We'll get the headlines now with Contessa Brewer. Hi, Contessa.
Hey there, Scott. Prosecutors will seek first-degree murder charges against the man accused of killing a Minnesota lawmaker and her husband and injuring another lawmaker and his wife. Those charges include 2 counts of second-degree murder and another 2 counts of second-degree attempted intentional murder. The Hennepin County Attorney's Office also said today suspect Vance Bolter went to a total of 4 homes looking to kill lawmakers, but some weren't home. The UN's nuclear agency is warning there could be contamination inside Iran's main nuclear enrichment facility in Natanz after Israel strikes. The agency head said right now radiation levels outside the facility are normal, but anyone inside has to wear special filters to protect against radiation risk. And in Paris, the Louvre is at a standstill. The museum staff today spontaneously went on strike during what was supposed to be a routine internal meeting. They're protesting unmanageable crowds and chronic understaffing. I mean, the way it looks here is that it's empty, right? But no, that's more like what I remember from March, Scott. Last year, Louvre welcomed nearly 9 million visitors, nearly double what the building is supposed to accommodate. And when I was there, by the way, there were massive crowds, and our guide said, "You don't know how lucky you are today. There is nobody here. This never happens." Crazy.
Yeah, we'll follow that. Contessa, thanks. Contessa Brewer. Straight ahead, today's ETF Edge. Dom Chu standing by with Star Tech analyst Dan Ives. He has a new ETF. The theme is AI. We'll discuss next.
I'ma kick back when you fake like that. Would you let me go?
Introducing the new Infiniti QX60. True luxury refuses to follow. It leads.
I'ma kick back when you fake like that. Head of the
Y al rato me banean por eso, por la música del comercial. ¿Qué les iba a contar? Tesla quiere salir de los 330 para tocar 331 y seguir adelante, pero pues esperemos. Esto no es, claro, esto no es trading. Yo no estoy haciendo trading, pero bueno, son muy pocas las ocasiones que hago trading porque el mercado es bueno, en el sentido de que yo puedo comprar algo antes de que cierre el mercado y al siguiente día venderlo. Eso no es trading. Trading es comprar ahorita mismo y venderlo más tarde. Es una práctica que conlleva su riesgo y pocos perfiles de inversionista se atreven a hacer eso o se atreven a que se gestione de esa manera su cartera de inversión. Entonces esto no es trading, simplemente yo lo que hago es monitorear los portafolios que ya están construidos y ajustarlos. Es decir, sí, hay compras y hay ventas, claro. Como United Health, cuando tocó los 210, no, 317 se vendió. O sea, ¿para qué me quedo si sé que va a caer 315? Y no, espérense, aquí 315. O sea, ¿para qué me quedo si yo sé que ese es el precio objetivo? Que yo sé que va a bajar. Y vean, ahorita 306. Es momento de compra, esperemos, porque ya cruzó este piso. Esperemos a que llegue a este, y si no, a este. Y eso y aquí ya está tocando porque aquí ya ha tocado un rendimiento lateral. O sea, se ha estado manteniendo lateral, se ha estado consolidando el precio para ya decir, ok, ya pasaron los riesgos financieros a los cuales United está expuesto, pues vamos a venderla. O, ¿sabes qué? Esto va para largo, puede que caiga. Entonces pasa eso. Entonces esto no es trading y se llama trading intradía, no solo trading. Muchos lo conocen como trading, sí. Y dicen, pues haces trading, compras y vendes diario. No siempre. El mercado, digamos que se tiene que poner de pechito para que pase eso, si no, no. O sea, es riesgoso, lo he hecho, por supuesto que sí. He aprendido mucho, sí. He ganado mucho también. He perdido también, por supuesto. O sea, hay de todo aquí, ¿no? Entonces, esto es la gestión activa, o sea, compramos un lunes y tal vez un martes lo vendamos, un miércoles, un jueves, un viernes, un sábado, el próximo lunes que diga. Veamos esto.
The high quality. Joining me now is Dan Ives, the global head of tech research at Wedbush Securities, who recently launched an ETF with his name as the ticker literally on the line. IVES is the ETF name, and it's basically your concentrated picks within artificial intelligence. What is the common denominator or the differentiating factors that make these the top picks amongst your AI plays?
It's who I view as really the winners. I mean, in terms of this disruptive technology theme, look, I think it's a fourth industrial revolution. So it's not just about chips, it's about who do you play in hyperscale, software, names like Palantir, consumer names like Meta, autonomous, you can names like Tesla, of course, names like Aqua from a nuclear perspective. So our whole view is this is really what I view as the winners and the second, third, fourth derivatives of the $2 trillion that's going to be spent in the next 3 years.
Now, when you talk about the mechanics of an ETF, you're kind of managing, advising, sub-advising on the portfolio. When it comes to what goes in or out, how often do you rebalance? If one name falls out of favor, how do you find the replacements? What's the thought process there?
Yeah, these are all based on our Ives AI 30. So these are reports. So as we put them out, 3 million air miles the last 25 years. I mean, we do that on the ground trying to understand who the winners are. Those come in out of the report.
Saludos,
so we
Charlie.
focus on new winners,
Saludos.
they
Ya no te
come
puedo ver
in.
ese día que
If
fui a
someone I
City
believe
Center,
is now
pero
maybe like from a
en el
technology
futuro.
perspective, engineers showing, companies showing that they're not performing, then they come out. So ultimately it's really, this is dynamic every quarter. And look, and that's investors around the world have relied on us in terms of tech. But when I view
Dan Ives es un analista especialista en tecnología. Hay que escuchar lo que dice.
with the biggest theme we've seen in the last 40, 50 years.
So if this is that fourth industrial revolution, and you mentioned kind of around the world and global, most of that is the U.S. There's no doubt about it. It's maybe quantitatively so. It's not just, though, in the U.S. There's international plays in AI as well. What's the thinking there?
Yeah, I mean, Baidu, Alibaba, I mean, because our view is that you have to have China exposure when it comes to AI. Look, there could be more international, over the coming, months, over the coming years. But Dom, this is, as I talked about, I mean, this is second inning of a 9-inning game. And when we look at the AI revolution, we're now just starting to see it go from Godfather of AI, Jensen, NVIDIA, to software, to the use cases. And I think that's why what makes me so excited is that this is something that's going to be going on for the next 5-10 years as a theme.
And before we let you go, one more quick follow-up before we let you go. What do you think among those industry groups is the biggest driver of the AI trade going forward?
I mean, to me, it's software, because when you look at names like Massive AI, Palantir, you look what we're seeing across hyperscalers in terms of software, Microsoft, one of our top picks, the use case phase is now just starting to play out. And that's why I think that's why I think you're going to see tech new all-time highs, going into the rest of the year. It's AI driving it. And I continue to believe in this AI party. It's only 10 p.m. and the party goes to 4 a.m.
All right, 10 p.m., 4 a.m. Scott, my thanks to Dan over here. We're going to continue this entire conversation over at etfedge.cnbc.com. Dan will be joined by Todd Rosenbluth, the head of research over at Vetify. So a lot of stocks to pick in those names, Scott. I'll send things back over to you guys.
All right, Dom, thanks so much. Appreciate that. Up next, time for the halftime mid-year report cards. Uh-oh, we're going to break down the biggest winners and losers in the committee's portfolios just after this break.
After this break. Ok, nada importante. Actualizaron el precio del Deutsche Bank. Actualizó el precio de Cisco. Pero Cisco, aquí está, Cisco Systems. No vi el número, pero $65. No está mala empresa. La verdad es que es bastante buena. No es de mi estilo. O sea, vean, ahorita es un gran día en bolsa. Es un día de máximos históricos. Y está generando $1.32, más de 2% de rendimiento. O sea, prefiero con $65 comprar, o sea, por $10 más, claro, y lo compro más. Claro, este dejó $3, 3.30 de rendimiento. Lo vendí hace como una hora. No, es como 40 minutos. Entonces, o sea, ya. O sea, en cuanto un activo sube y deja rendimiento, véndelo. Y compramos otro más barato. Y así se va. Hay acciones que sí se mantienen durante más tiempo, un mes, 2 meses, 3 meses, dependiendo del horizonte en tiempo. Es decir, si el cliente dice, oye, pues ¿sabes qué? Pues yo quiero invertir y dejar mi capital un año. Ah, bueno, pues de enero a agosto, septiembre vamos a estar así, comprando y vendiendo y unas las dejamos así sus largos meses. A partir ya desde el tercer, cuarto trimestre del año, entonces ahora sí, a ver, vamos a cambiar toda la estrategia porque tu capital, tú dijiste que lo quieres en un año. Entonces ya se acerca ese año, el fin del año, entonces ya vamos a cambiar todo. O sea, literalmente se cambia toda la estrategia, todos los activos. Se compran otros, se venden otros, se mueven más lento, porque ya no podemos darnos el lujo de que se mueva un 3%, un 6%. O sea, ya no, ahora se van a mover 1 o 2% al alza y a la baja también, en caso de que bajen. Entonces eso va a dar las pautas para tener más movimiento y vender a final de ese año. Y si es un cliente como de, pues sí, ya es un año, pero ¿sabes qué? Pues me quedo otros 6 meses, un año, o esto, o sea, al final de cuentas, esto es una aportación a su retiro, a las afores, a su casa, el fondo de emergencia de sus hijos. Esto es a largo plazo y es los valores, las responsabilidades y la autoeducación que hay que impartir en que esto es un juego de paciencia. Los más pacientes son los que siempre más ganan. Siempre. O sea, es impresionante y me costó mucho desarrollarlo en los últimos 5 años de estar en todo esto. La paciencia. O sea, es una gran herramienta, pero también es uno de nuestros demonios más peligrosos o más poderosos. Pero bueno. Tengo liquidez todavía, pero ya son 11:15. Yo voy a estar aquí hasta las 11:30. Tengo una llamada y tengo que desayunar. O más bien almorzar. Pero voy a volver, obviamente, para el cierre. Ahorita lo que estoy viendo es que, miren, vean a 5 minutos. Ya el efecto de rally, el efecto de alza fuerte ya se desaceleró. Entonces, ¿qué pasa en estos casos? O compramos, obviamente con esa visión de que yo ya sé que ya se desgastó el rally de hoy. Sé que ya se cansó el mercado, por lo tanto lo que compre lo más seguro es que a día de hoy, en la sesión de hoy, hasta las 2 de la tarde se caiga ese activo. Entonces, ¿qué me conviene? Esperarme o comprar. Depende del horizonte en tiempo. Si quiero mi capital mañana mismo para comprar otra cosa, o la otra semana, o mejor me espero para agarrar una ganga, algo más barato el día de mañana. Vamos a ver esto.
Your best, up 38%.
Yes.
What is it?
It's a European testing company. So in Europe, there's lots of regulatory requirements on testing of food, drugs, everything from makeup to agricultural products. And Eurofin does that. Its biggest single country is the United States, but it's a European company. It's a Luxembourg company. It's an ETF. It's up 38%, and we bought it after it came down following COVID. So we've owned it for a few years, and it's been a very good stock this year.
Okay. Among your winners, Joe, CrowdStrike, Uber, and Netflix all have had tremendous years. I said what I did at the top because Amazon's the perfect example of this. Amazon's down 3% year to date. You hold that stock.
I do.
You bought it at 191. When?
I bought it in February in the sell-off. I actually bought it at 194.
194.
I remember saying at the time the ETF didn't hold a position, and I wanted to be in Amazon because we cited before with AWS.
You bought it at 194. Today's at 215.
Yes.
Year to date, not good. For you, good.
Staying with the position. Other two names that I have, DocuSign and Zoom, both those names are in the ETF. I feel uncomfortable getting out of those positions personally when the ETF maintains it. I'll tell you this, though. Last earnings report for each of these companies were a complete miss.
All right. Jimmy, year-to-date winners. Now, you know what? Let's just skip to the losers. No, just kidding. I'm just kidding. MP Materials up 96%, Oracle up 29%, Visa up 14%.
Well, MP is one I don't talk about too much, and I put this on about a year and a half ago.
What's wrong with you?
Yeah.
Stocks at double.
Yeah, I don't control the curriculum here, Your Honor. Your Honor, I respond to the questions.
Raise your hand, I'd like to talk about this name. It's crushing it.
Okay, MP, let's talk about it.
All right, let's do it.
Look, the reason that I bought this 18 months ago was for the strategic reason that is showing up right now. It's a rare earth element miner and refiner, and it's now starting to build magnets for end users like General Motors that are having problems getting the same from China. It is being referred to as Western champion, and I think that's absolutely right. It's being reflected in the share price. What else do you want to talk about?
Well, we said Oracle as part of you. You already talked about that. We did Visa, which is up 14% year to date. Kerry, United Health is down 38.5% year to date. I think people are pretty familiar with the story at this point.
Yeah.
Why are you still holding it?
We hold it, and we actually bought some more right at the bottom because we think that these are structural changes that are not going to last, that they are fixable, that they're going to have better Medicare reimbursement, better Medicaid reimbursement, and that the company is going to recover.
Wait, you mean you bought some more at the bottom? The stock looks like it's at the bottom. No, I'm serious. We just showed the chart.
So you're right. In the past couple of weeks, when the stock had these big jump downs after they reported earnings, we added a small position. It's only a 1.5% position.
I get it, but don't try and put me in the spin zone.
Correct. You're right. We believe that it's fixable and that they're on the way to making things better at United Healthcare.
All right, good stuff. What do you say?
I think this is a valuable exercise for all of the viewers to be doing, and the reason that you want to do that is you identify what your winners are and your losers. And in 2025, momentum is one of the strongest factors. When momentum is a strong factor, that generally means you have a healthy market. Think about 21. Momentum rolled over and the market followed along. This is a good exercise. Everyone should be doing it. Stay with winners, shed the losers.
All right, up next, Santoli. Speaking of winners, he's with us for his midday word next.
This is Mia. She dreams of taking her boutique swimwear brand nationwide. With her business growing so fast, she needs fast funding to keep making waves. That's why Mia has U.S. Bank Business Essentials, a combination of checking and card payment processing, giving her access to funds typically in 24 hours. Because we love watching her make a splash. That's the power of Mia. And this is the power of us.
It's about political points. It's terrible. Politics seeps into everything.
What do you mean? Talk about climate change or the economy or, of course, elections.
You can't find out what we should really expect to happen.
But of course you can.
Go to IBKR's Forecast Trader. Put your money where your mouth is.
Pedro's parents planned for adventure, but they didn't plan for him to make a new best friend. You were made to get more than you bargained for. We were made to help you save on packages. Expedia, made to travel.
Y yo, changos, debí de cortar la música desde antes. Estoy checando las sesiones informativas que voy a hacer a partir de hoy. La idea, primeramente, es hacerlo diario, pero diario también es muy cansado. Entonces dije, bueno, lunes, miércoles y viernes, o lunes, martes y jueves, sesiones informativas de 30 minutos sobre los retiros, las afores, los rendimientos, la situación financiera actual en nuestro país y cuál es la mejor opción de inversión. Eso es lo que voy a hacer. 30 minutos, rápido y conciso, desde una laptop, un teléfono y audífonos. Adelante, sin broncas. Y por ahora no tiene costo. La verdad es que es un tema de educación, de valores financieros, del cual no quiero cobrar, aunque también es, no sé, ya la veré. Es programa piloto. Estamos en programa piloto de eso. Pero pues poco a poco vamos avanzando. Y haciendo un país de inversionistas, México, hacer un país de inversionistas, impartir la cultura financiera cada vez más. Mientras, usados frecuentemente, Amazon, Lauder, Palantir. Palantir la sigue rompiendo, cada vez en máximos históricos, poco a poco. Poco a poco. Fácil puede llegar hasta $200 y romper a Oracle. O sea, actualmente ahorita cuesta lo que costaba Oracle hace 2 meses, hace 2, 3 meses. Entonces, ¿qué onda? Voy a dejar eso en lo que voy al baño.
Knock it off course and destabilize that comp. Mentioned on Friday that even the initial pullback, you didn't even violate like the 20-day moving average, that's a short-term uptrend. You didn't really cross any significant tripwires that said the market was now out of gear. Now, we've gone back to last week's highs almost exactly, and we stalled there and kind of hanging out. So I guess it sort of brings us back to where we were, which is the market's had a great run. It's priced in some good things. It's probably going to need a little more to get past to the old highs, which is only not even 2% up from here. But it shows you that it's able to shrug off some of the geopolitical noise if, in fact, it doesn't come through punishing oil prices.
Fed meeting is going to be critical in terms of what to listen for, more than what they're going to do.
Yes.
Maybe they give you, the chair does, an idea of what could lie ahead when the next time we're going to hear from him is in Jackson Hole.
Late July.
Oh, late July.
So at the very end of July will be the last meeting before Jackson. But nonetheless, it's 6 or 7 weeks from now. And I think that, there's a chance for a wider divergence in terms of the dot plot. I think you've seen some decent inflation prints. Maybe it enables some dovishness to make its way in there. But I guess, people, they're still going to try to wait and see. And I don't think anything that's happened since the last meeting has moved them off that idea that they have the luxury of waiting. At some point, maybe it becomes less persuasive when they say policy's in a good place, but I think he's going to say it again.
Yeah, I'd be curious. I assume he's going to be asked about the moves in the bond market and his thoughts on the way rates have traded, why they have, and that'll be key to listen for as well.
It will. Usually he's not too alarmist about it, I think, because the functioning of the bond market has been fine and haven't had real trouble with auctions. Also, 10-year, as much as it has sort of gotten people's attention, it's kind of in the 2-year range and hasn't really bumped above that.
All right, thanks, Michael. See you in a little bit. We'll do finals next.
At Morgan Stanley, old school hard work meets bold new thinking.
Okay.
To help you see untapped possibilities.
Listo. Okay. Interesting. Ok, vamos a quitar eso por ahora. Regresemos aquí y veamos los índices. ¿Cómo van los índices? A ver. Porque lo que ahorita tengo que hacer es copiar un portafolio y analizarlo en el sentido de cuál es el riesgo actual. Miren, chéquense. 1.50, vamos a actualizar. Porque Nasdaq estaba en 1.40, 1.50, ok. 1.89, 1.27, bien. Bien, es un buen día. Ahora, si nosotros vamos a ver el índice de miedo y codicia, no lo he visto. Yo espero que esté en 62, 63. Más o menos en eso lo espero ver. Y está en 61. Ok. Al cierre puede cambiar, puede subir a 62, 63. Si eso pasa, greed en codicia significa que tal vez el rally continúe mañana. Tal vez. Ahora, de acuerdo. Ay, me dio frío, quiero un chaleco. De acuerdo a los diarios que tenemos de inversiones, el índice de miedo y codicia ha estado bajando. Es decir, está en 65 y termina en 60 la semana. Y así pasa durante 2 semanas. Después de 2 semanas viene una semana alcista. Y esa semana alcista es esta semana en la que estamos. El jueves no sé qué día es festivo, pero no vamos a laborar ese día. Está bien. Ah, tal vez por fin haga el directo que tanto quiero hacer de una serie de negocios. Pero bueno, mientras tanto, ganadores tenemos, chéquense esto, Goldman Sachs liderando el Dow Jones, Nasdaq, AMD liderando el Nasdaq y S&P 500 igual, liderando AMD. Tenemos este Lauder, la única compra que tiene Zion Management, Michael Burry en su portafolio. Y ¿quién está sufriendo? Todos estos están sufriendo. Nada, First Solar, tal vez importante. Nasdaq. Charter Communications. AstraZeneca. Y ya. Y si vamos al Dow Jones, vamos a ver. Cisco, no, acá. McDonald's sufriendo. Vamos a ver. MSB. McDonald's 2.97. ¿Cuándo llegará a estar cara? Digo, barata. Yo digo que en 270. Yo digo. Pero pues esperemos. Ahorita no tiene señales de recuperación, así que lo único que ha hecho es caer, caer y caer. Y cuando comience ese piso, que tal vez sea aquí, 296, o sea, después de perder, es que no fue mucho. O sea, estamos hablando que su histórico, al menos aquí en el gráfico, fue de 305. Pero vean esto, viene una caída mucho mayor. O sea, estado en los $315. O sea, McDonald's sería momento de compra. No lo creo. Yo me esperaría. Y aparte, McDonald's casi no se mueve. O sea, en el sentido de que su beta de riesgo es muy baja. Y aquí no aparece. Pero ha de andar como en unos 5 o menos. Mucho menos. Porque son alimentos. Pero bueno. Vamos a ver. Usamos frecuentemente. Listo. Bien. Ahora. ¿Qué tenemos? Vamos a ver, porque hay liquidez. Creo que esa es de las cosas más estresantes como gestor, que tienes liquidez, hay capital para comprar, pero ¿qué compras? Entonces tienes que ver, o sea, el movimiento, tienes que ver el portafolio y si ese activo lo embonas ahí, cómo se va a desarrollar el portafolio, los pesos en la cartera. O sea, cuánto va a ser el 3, el 5, el 7% de la cartera, ¿no? O sea, es lo que hay que ver. Bull ya pasó a negativo. Mm, Bitcoin subiendo, ya está en 107, bien. Ethereum, ¿cómo va? A ver, $69. No, ya valió, ya valió. Llegó a su máximo y ya. Parece que 2.659 es su piso, pero aquí en donde se cayó recientemente. Tesla se mantiene en 330, vean, sigue lateral alcista, es decir, hacia acá. Ok. Pro, Nasdaq, TNA, nada importante. Voy a ver stock tweets, a ver. Vamos a abrir esta. Vamos a pasarla para acá. Vamos a buscar stock tweets. Aquí estás. A ver, ya volvimos, vamos a ver.
Parker, Mohamed El-Arian, Brian Levitt, Samir Samana, and Jeremy Cotter's with us too as we continue to talk about the AI arms race. He's a pre-IPO Facebook employee, and he has a lot of thoughts on where all of this is going. So we'll do that at 3. I hope you'll join me then. Farmer Jim.
Disney, Joe.
¿Qué pasó? ¿Qué pasó? ¿Se quiere trabar? No. A ver, DGNX. DGNX Limited, esa cosa aquí. PHH. Ok. Ánimo. Internet dice, y eso, y tengo que reiniciar mi computadora por las actualizaciones. Tengo actualizaciones pendientes.
Hey, Kelly, I'm told by a senior Gulf diplomat that those reports that the Iranians are reaching out to try and see if it's possible to negotiate are true. Now, of course, the question here is about what kind of negotiations the Iranians are really interested in, because the Israelis are signaling still today that they have no interest in negotiating anything other than the complete removal of Iran's nuclear program, civil or military. And the Israelis are winning this now, but military sides and to try to target Iranian leaders. Even the Prime Minister Netanyahu.
¿Qué pasó, amiguito?
Target Iranian leaders. Even the Prime Minister Netanyahu, again refusing to rule out the prospect of targeting the Ayatollah, the leader of Iran, despite the NBC News reporting that the Trump administration told Israel it did not want it to do that. So a mixed picture, and certainly a very dynamic picture. And one of the questions, of course, is about how effective the Israelis really are being in targeting that Iranian nuclear program. The Fordo site, which many people who know the detail will know, is buried deep in the ground. The Israelis continue to say they have not targeted Fordo, despite having targeted Natanz, they say, and destroying much of what was there, and Isfahan. So again, a mixed picture, the possibility of diplomacy, but at the same time, I wouldn't rule out the prospect that this continues now for weeks, possibly longer.
Although we're learning, Keir, that the Israeli military now tells.
Oigan, el tipo de cambio está bajando, está en 18.91, tal vez. 18.91. A ver, déjenme hacer una pregunta. ¿Cuál sería el tipo de cambio? Mientras dejan pongo esto.
With you, and it does appear, I mean, signs are pointing in that direction that the Iranians are asking for a pause of some kind of truce here. I don't know the word to use. What more do you expect in order to come to some kind of international agreement?
Actually, I disagree with that. I don't see the signs of that at all. And I don't think that some of those reports have been accurate. I think it would be fantastic, of course, if there was a return to the table. But based on my own conversations with the administration, we're not seeing that at this point. And when it happens, it will not happen in the manner that the Israelis or the administration would hope for. It will happen in a way in which the Iranians will likely harden their position. Opinion inside of Iran, both in the elite and society, has dramatically shifted in favor of weaponization. That's not where it was before this conflict, but it's shifted dramatically in favor of weaponization as a result of what the Israelis have done, which makes it more difficult for the Iranians to negotiate a compromise, even based on the one that they agreed to, which was 3.67%. Right. Zero enrichment was always a non-starter. It's going to be even more difficult to get that at this point.
Let me just jump in, because I'm glad that you said all of that, because there are plenty of skeptics saying, even if Iran comes and says, okay, we're ready to strike a deal, why should the international public believe them?
Well, it's not actually that, because they were ready to strike a deal. They were in a deal. Trump walked out of that deal. And they were also at the table. There were supposed to be talks on Sunday. You're talking about this as if the Iranians left the table. The Israelis bombed the table. That's what happened here. So the question of actually getting back to the table is not one in which the Iranians are the ones holding out or the U.S. holding out. It's the fact that this bombing has pushed the two sides so far away from each other that it's difficult for both of them to be able to find a face-saving way back to the negotiating table.
But when you say that the Iranians are now going to race for the nuclear weapon, and again, according to reports, they could maybe have that by 2026, you say this is hardened public opinion within the country and so forth, then is there anything left for the international community to do? If that's the case, then what's the response from international institutions?
No, I didn't say that they're racing for a bomb. I'm saying opinion in the country has shifted dramatically in favor of going for a bomb, which makes it more difficult to get a deal because the compromises are going to be increasingly costly and the political maneuverability for the Iranians is less than what it was before. We still have to try, though, because reality is that is the only way this can be resolved in a satisfactory way. What we're seeing right now is that the Israelis are not being successful in taking out the nuclear sites. They're bombing TV stations.
Well, they don't have the heavy. They need the heavy U.S. planes, right, in order to reach these deep underground sites. Yeah.
Exactly. Which is why the question is, why did they start this when they actually don't have the capacity to finish it? Well, they did so because their aim is to drag the U.S. into this war, and so far Trump has said no to that. But instead, they're bombing TV stations. They're setting off 5 car bombs, apparently, in Tehran, according to themselves yesterday. Mm-hmm. That is not a sign of a successful campaign to get rid of the Iranian nuclear program.
Perhaps, Tom, you know, the way that this is being framed right now is that Israel kind of has Iran cornered and that they're the ones holding the cards in their airspace and so forth, and that's why the Iranians are reportedly responding the way that they are. Do you, like Trita, kind of disagree with that assessment?
Well, I think the key question to start with is, did Israel have a legal basis for resorting to force against Iran? And under international law, there are only 2 bases on which one can resort to force, to resort to military action. One is the authorization of the Security Council, which has not authorized this action, and the other is self-defense. And self-defense has to be either against an ongoing or an imminent armed attack, a specified and imminent armed attack with respect to which there's no alternative other than defensive reaction. And even on Israel's own account, the action in this case does not meet that defensive imperative because it is about precluding Iran's capability vis-a-vis a possible future attack as opposed
But
to
Tom,
addressing it.
the IAEA's report, which was just a day or so before this campaign was launched, indicated that Iran was on the path towards achieving these weapons. And there seems to be international consensus that now you have people saying, yeah, probably 2026 could be realistic for that. Why does that not pose an imminent threat to Israel?
2026 is not an imminent threat. As Trita mentioned, there were ongoing negotiations. There was a previous deal, the JCPOA, which had been working before the United States withdrew. But even in the current context, there were negotiations ongoing. There were supposed to be discussions on Sunday.
Pasó, amiguito. Ibas bien.
That is an alternative mechanism through which to preclude the development of a nuclear weapon, and therefore does not justify the resort to force on defensive grounds. Defensive force is where there is no alternative. There was an alternative. That alternative was obliterated by this attack. And so there is no legal basis for resorting to defensive force in this particular context. 2026 is not an imminent threat.
Right, but as I understand it, I'm no nuclear expert.
Ánimo, tú puedes. No sé,
And in taking
no creo
out
que se le
areas that otherwise would pose probably a pretty imminent threat to them. So, you know, are we quibbling around the calendar timing here?
No, the question is there an alternative mechanism through which to address a threat? And is the threat real and imminent, or is it prospective and possible, perceived? If we start applying a standard through which states can attack whenever they think there's a possible future attack oncoming from an adversary, and where they are acting in this current moment to preclude that possible future capability, then what we are doing is setting up an international system whereby when Russia sees the possibility of Ukraine joining NATO and a possible future threat posed by that, they're going to attack. When the United States sees the possibility of weapons of mass destruction in Iraq, they're going to attack. And in these kinds of instances, Israel's going to attack Iran. And all of those are unlawful uses of force, and the legal threshold is set at a specific and imminent attack precisely so as to set a limit on the resort to force, to set a limit on the context in which we go to war.
Yeah,
so
I don't know if October 7th changed that, though, Tom.
Well, it didn't change vis-a-vis this specific issue that we're discussing right now. October 7th was an attack by Hamas. It resulted in an authorization.
Is Hamas funded by Iran?
Funding doesn't generate a right of defensive force regarding this particular situation in this moment. Israel is not claiming in this moment that it is responding with a defensive imperative necessity vis-a-vis the Hamas attacks in its engagement in Iran right now. It's claiming that it is doing so with a view to precluding a future capability.
Understood. Trita, I'll give you the last word here. Tie this up to the extent that you can, at least for the moment here. As investors, in the market mood is matching more of this constructive take on the whole situation, which is that Israel, to some extent, has an upper hand here and may be able to force Iran into some kind of conciliatory stance.
I can't speak to what the markets are thinking, but you know the reporting of this in times of war is filled with misinformation. So perhaps they're acting on some of that misinformation in order to adopt a more optimistic view of what will happen here. I think facts on the ground point to a very dangerous situation, a very dangerous risk of escalation, particularly mindful of the fact that despite everything the Israelis are saying, they're not succeeding in actually really damaging the nuclear program, at least as of yet, and the prospects for that is very limited. I also just want to say many of the things that were said earlier on are simply incorrect. The IAEA said that the Iranians are in non-compliance with some of their reporting requirements. That is very, very different from anything similar to what you stated, which is that they're close to a nuclear weapon. That is not what the IAEA said. There's no international consensus on that whatsoever. So what the Israelis are doing is actually using the Iraq playbook that turned out to be absolutely devastating for the United States. They're setting up a false case for war. And in this case, they're setting it up for the United States to enter the war. And just as much as the Iraq war ended up being absolutely disastrous strategically for the United States, there's very little to indicate that a war with Iran that has shown itself to be far more capable than fighting back will be anything but an absolute travesty and a strategic setback.
As you see it, this is about dragging the U.S. Into it and becoming involved. Gentlemen, thanks. Appreciate it this hour. Trita Parsi from the Quincy Institute and Tom Dannenbaum from Tufts Fletcher School. Now, all of this is happening as we're just a couple of days away from the latest Fed move on interest rates. Crude oil prices have paired Friday's gains. Remember, we was up as much as 13-14% when this first happened. Now crude settling in around $72 a barrel. Iran's oil fields could still be in play for future airstrikes. And the question is whether any disruption to the global energy supply will ripple back and have an impact on the Fed's path forward. Well, Steve Leisman is here to tackle that, Steve, and take a closer look at how the officials might be thinking through this and whether it will lead them to sort of a hawkish tilt on Wednesday.
Yeah, Kelly, interesting questions. The Fed officials are going to watch that surge in crude carefully, especially because of lingering concern about the impact of tariffs on inflation. But history shows that while headline inflation will rise, price spikes in crude often don't end up in the core, and that's what the Fed cares about the most. Price spikes in 74 and 80, they sent headline inflation soaring, and they also lifted overall prices in the early 2000s. Core inflation, that removes food and energy, but also spiked in 74 and 80. But then take a look at the next chart. You see that blue line remains very constant while oil prices go up and down, little response except for when the pandemic hit. One reason could be that consumers, they spend more money on energy, depresses spending in other places, so it becomes an economic headwind. That is, unless inflation expectations become unanchored and monetary policy is too loose as it was in the 70s. That's a mistake the Fed has vowed not to make again. In fact, rate cut probabilities now show about a 67.
Ánimo, si se puede. Tú lo puedes lograr. ¿Ven cómo se traba?
Funds matter for monetary policy, and in some cases, especially when it comes to the volatility of oil prices, we exit out just to make sure we got policy right.
This meeting comes as we've just had a surge of better than expected inflation data, right? And yet the uncertainty is out there. Well, but what about June? Well, but what about July? Well, but what about August, you know?
I think that people are a little bit impatient waiting for it to show up, but I think their expectations are a little bit, what's the right word, getting ahead of themselves in the sense that, well, you put these things on in April for a bit, you kind of took them off, but you kind of left a bunch of them there. The idea that all of it shows up in May, most of the people I'm reading right now, most of the major forecasters are saying, hey, it's going to happen. You cannot put this level of tariffs out there and it not show up in prices. But we've talked about this. There are many stations along the way where it could get absorbed. And so the real question we want to know, there are two questions we want to know is, one, how much of the tariff ends up in consumer prices? And two, whether or not that the other side of that is economic weakness, not higher prices.
All right, Steve, for now. Appreciate it very much, Steve Leisman. Coming up, stocks are rebounding from Friday's sell-off, but our next guest sees opportunity in the energy space. He says it's tough to slow oil demand if you can't slow the economy, and he's here to make his case. Plus, the G7 summit is underway in Canada, but the more interesting action may be on the sidelines as per usual. The EU's trade chief reportedly meeting with Ambassador Greer. Could a major trade deal emerge from this week's gathering? The Exchange is back after this.
This is The Exchange on CNBC.
Franklin Templeton Custom Tax Management. Easily create custom SMAs with our Canvas platform and help investors keep more of what they earn. Franklin Templeton, your trusted partner for what's ahead.
We are going to write the future of healthcare, one where care is more personalized, more accessible, and much lower cost. This IPO is an important moment, but it is still just the beginning of our story.
Behind every click lies something irreplaceable. Your data, your thriving business, your promising future. Yet with each technological innovation come those determined to exploit it. That's why Cycurion's four-layered, first-of-its-kind protection system doesn't just respond to threats. It predicts and protects. Today, security isn't just a feature, it's fundamental to everything you value. At Cycurion, we're committed to evolving the next generation of AI-enabled defense.
Madres, tengo que... Listo. Tengo una llamada ahorita. Oh, mm, ya quedó un recibo de pago. En total me faltan tres. Dos salen, verga, salen este mes. Y el 15 de julio sale otro. Y el 30 de julio sale otro y así. Este, Voy a trabajar en eso ahorita. Y la conferencia, bueno, primero la llamada. Y después me voy a volver a conectar. Como 12:30, una. Y ya para terminar el día de hoy. Vamos a checar. Ok, va. Entonces, me vuelvo a conectar en un rato, amigos. Qué bueno que vieron esto. Y pues sigamos. Vamos a checar, vamos a actualizar acá. Vamos a actualizar esto. Que se actualice bien.
Who knows what's going to go on with this? No one does. Congratulations. That's great for low IQ people like me and Dad, and we're going to be fine in this. But here's really the setup. If you go back and look at these stocks, their low was not the low of energy prices. It was the height of economic fears the 3 days that followed Liberation Day.
Early April.
Correct. And so what I don't think people understand is this is a proxy of economic growth. If someone says, what do we use oil for and what do we use this carbon-based stuff for? It's really for economic growth, productivity, incomes rising, things like that. And so that is the primary thing that could hurt the oil business. If you were going to play real conspiracy theorists, and I mentioned this, right before I walked in.
Sure.
Why was OPEC out of nowhere creating these production increases? Well, you would have thought then they wanted to gain market share. If I sit back today and watch what's going on in the Middle East, I would say because the Abraham Accords were called off. And so that is Israel and Saudi Arabia being main players in that. This was planned. This attack was planned. That's why the international community is so frustrated with it probably, is because they weren't in those dialogues and they didn't know. I think if that's true, if that theory is true, the Trump administration has been very tight-lipped about this, but it would make sense why OPEC was adding production, because they knew that there could be a potential supply issue that they might need to meet.
Listo, todo bien. Entonces, me desconecto aquí, amigos. Nos vemos en un rato. Chao, chao.